This presentation was designed as an overview of Tier 2 support and instruction. Included in this presentation is information to clarify what Tier 2 is, considerations for Tier 2 support, Tier 2 problem solving, planning, instruction, monitoring, and review. The level of instruction for Tier 2 should be designed to address deficits in foundational skills necessary to acquire core instruction, implemented to address the needs of groups of students. It should be specifically scheduled so that it does not take the place of core instruction. Sometimes Tier 2 supplemental instruction takes place during an intervention block, and other times it is provided during an elective. This level of instruction is typically needed for about 15 to 20% of our students at each grade level. As a district, our primary goal for the 17-18 school year is supporting the fidelity of Tier 2 instruction. In order to ensure that interventions and instructional plans are implemented consistently, schools must select an appropriate intervention delivery model. Options include school-wide intervention block, grade level intervention block, within classroom intervention time, an elective class, or year-long or double block class. This group activity is designed to take a closer look at the different intervention delivery models that are available. For this group activity, each member of the group would read one of the intervention delivery models silently and just write a sentence summary, one pro and one con for your model, and then share the information with your group. The intervention delivery model used by many schools in Cleveland County have typically been either the school-wide or the grade level delivery model. Both of these models designate a time separate from core instruction as win time. Whether your school calls it SMART time or some other acronym, the intention is for this to be a designated time for all students to receive instruction on their level. All WIN instruction should include these elements to be a purposeful, effective instructional time. WIN instruction is for all students, should be skill-focused, structured and chunked, delivered in small groups, in direct instruction. Students should be engaged and active and responding, and receiving constructive feedback. Establishing a consistent win time does more than just provide a time for intervention instruction. It protects core instruction, allows time for intervention, core support, and enrichment groups, utilizes all available staff and considers available resources appropriate for instruction, and considers training needed for staff to be able to deliver quality instruction during win time. MTSS problem solving follows this cycle of problem identification, problem analysis, planning instruction to address the problem, and evaluating the plan to determine if it is adequately addressing the needs of students. Assessment is the driving factor for the problem-solving process. Tests that assess foundational skills at each grade level, such as DIBELS, Ames-Webb, and EasyCBM, are research-based assessments that use predictive validity based on national and local norms to identify and monitor the progress of at-risk students. Benchmark assessment 3 times per year at beginning, middle, and end-of-year assessments determine the health of core instruction, determine at-risk students, and guide instructional decisions for at-risk students. Progress monitoring assessments administered weekly, bi-weekly as every other week, or monthly for at-risk students, determine effectiveness of intervention instruction, determine fidelity of instructional protocols, and determine when more intense levels of support are needed. All levels of instructional support begin with data teams. The data team that conducts problem solving at Tier 2 level of support is the grade level PLC team. This team should consist of an administrator, a case colleague, grade level and subject level teachers, particularly those who are providing Tier 2 intervention instruction. Also, helpful staff members to contribute to the Tier 2 problem solving are the Title I teacher, teacher assistants, support staff, interventionists, and tutors, especially if they are providing Tier 2 intervention instruction. The grade level PLC teams review grade level data on a regular basis to make instructional decisions, such as Tier 2 instructional support planning, as well as monthly to monitor intervention fidelity. Also, to make adjustments to groups as indicated by the data, and to consider new students for group placement. At the semester, the Tier 2 PLC team reviews Tier 2 implementation. Using the most recent progress monitoring data and middle of year data, they determine needs of current Tier 2 students. They also use middle of the year benchmark data to identify additional at-risk students, using data decision guides to determine intervention needs and protocol instruction. Also at mid-year review, grade level PLC teams regroup students as needed into win groups for the next semester. An important role in the Tier 2 problem-solving team is the case colleague. The primary roles of the case colleague are to guide fellow teachers in problem-solving discussions and making data-driven decisions regarding instruction. Also to assist teachers with developing instructional plans at Tier 1 and supporting interpretation of protocols at Tier 2 and locating instructional resources. Most importantly, case colleagues help to maintain the fidelity of MTSS implementation process, progress monitoring, and documentation. Tier 2 problem solving begins with the grade level PLC team looking at data that indicate foundational skill needs of at-risk students. This includes data from DIBELS, AIMSweb, and Easy CBM assessment tools. The team uses skill progression and literacy data decision guides to help determine instructional needs of at-risk students. They then choose intervention protocols according to skill needs as instructional plans for Tier 2 groups. The Skill Progression Guide is a tool designed to provide information that identifies the benchmark assessments administered at each grade level and the related skills that the assessments indicate there may be needed investigation for instructional support. Data decision guides are available at each grade level, and each guide includes information about all of the skill assessments for that grade level. Information includes benchmark goals for beginning, middle, and end of year benchmarks, as well as Tier 2 instructional planning decisions for each result. Also included is diagnostic assessment information to guide instruction where out. Intervention protocols are educational practices that address the needs of students with skill deficits, have been proven over time to be broadly effective, can be generalized across contexts and populations, are supported by rigorous evidence, and are based on research, can be replicated from teacher to teacher to maximize effectiveness and efficiency. Instructional protocols are available in essential foundational literacy skills such as phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and math skills per grade level. The selected resources or programs for each intervention protocol were reviewed by the Intervention Protocol Committee to define the instructional delivery appropriate for supplemental and intensive levels of instruction. To do this, the protocols were designed to define ICE at each level, what instruction routines are expected, the scope and sequence of skills, and what training is needed, what materials or resources or programs should be used, how should the intervention be structured, and is adequate instructional time provided for students to be able to respond, including time, duration, group size, and instructor. The protocol also defines the recommended diagnostic and progress monitoring guidance. The majority of protocols for specific reading programs like Read Naturally GATE state that prior training is required before implementation. You will also notice that the instruction column recommends that the instructor follow the scope and sequence and lesson plans provided by the program. This section further describes the skills or instructional components typically included within each lesson. Furthermore, the prescribed environment, days per week, minutes per day, group size, etc., for the supplemental or intensive support has been defined by the program's guidelines for fidelity of implementation. If the prescribed environment cannot be followed due to schedules or limited resources, another literacy intervention protocol should be selected for your school or group of students. Each grade level will use a Tier 2 documentation spreadsheet to document student progress for each semester. Within each document, there is a tab at the bottom where you can click to duplicate the sheet for each intervention group so that all intervention groups are housed within one spreadsheet document. For your intervention group, enter the information for skill area, intervention protocol, progress monitoring tool, and related benchmark goals at the top. At the top of each column, enter the name of each student in the group, which will populate at the top, and the baseline data for each student. As you enter data over time, group and individual graphs based on the median scores of the 3 most recent data points will automatically populate at the bottom of the sheet for monthly fidelity discussions. The first graph shows the baseline data score in blue, the benchmark goal in red, and the student progress toward the benchmark in purple. The second graph compares the growth of each student in the intervention group. The last graph is an example of individual student data, with the red line at the top representing the benchmark, the blue dotted line representing student data points, and the purple line representing the trend of student data. Using this document, the grade level PLC teams have monthly fidelity discussions and make adjustments as data indicates through the semester using guidelines on the following slides. Also, use this data along with middle of year benchmark data to regroup students at middle of year to create a grade level Tier 2 documentation spreadsheet for spring semester monitoring. The only other documentation required for Tier 2 support is parent conference documentation for fall and spring semester for Tier 2 students. Monthly monitoring of instructional fidelity involves case colleagues initiating discussion of Tier 2 data and intervention instruction. PLC data teams review and compare data of intervention groups to determine intervention fidelity. Look for percent of effectiveness of the intervention based on adequate progress of the group of students. Let's look at this example of data for a Tier 2 group. 3 out of 4 of the students are demonstrating a positive response to the intervention, which would indicate instructional fidelity. A focus on discussion of the outlier student, determining if the group is the best placement for that student, would be appropriate discussion. Looking at this example of data, 3 out of 4 of our students are not demonstrating positive response to the intervention, which would indicate the need to investigate instructional fidelity of this intervention instruction. Instructional fidelity can be investigated quantitatively by the grade level PLC by examining the length of sessions, number of sessions per week, size, heterogeneity, closeness of performance level, etc. You'll see a link at the bottom and be able to find on our MTSS website intervention fidelity discussion questions to aid in this investigation process. There are also documentation to help with qualitative discussions, including asking questions to investigate instruction, behavior and motivation, building fluency, effective feedback, and delivery of person or program. Asking the question, should any of these be a stronger focus, or does the interventionist need more support? Monthly fidelity discussions start with looking at the progress of the group. The first question should be, are there indications of fidelity issues? The PLC team should discuss and address them with the quantitative and qualitative discussion guides. Next, move on to individual students that are outliers who are not making progress, and adjust instruction for those students as indicated below. Look at each example. Adjust instruction might mean focusing more on engaging the student or moving the student to a more skill-appropriate group. If you're seeing, as in this example, that there's no progress being made, inconsistent progress being made, as in this graph example, progress being made, but it not being adequate progress, because if this trend line continues, they'll never make it to the next benchmark, which is the goal of your Tier 2 intervention. You want your data to show adequate progress, to show that the trend line is heading in the direction of the next benchmark goal. The grade level PLC conducts a data dive each semester using benchmark data, recent progress monitoring data, and the data decision guides to restructure groups for the next semester. They also choose intervention protocols according to skill needs as instructional plans for Tier 2 groups for the new semester. So just to summarize this Tier 2 information, Tier 2 instruction focuses on groups of students whose benchmark data indicate they are at risk. The school schedule must employ an appropriate school delivery model to allow for intervention instruction. If the model includes a win time, all students should be properly engaged at their levels of instruction. PLC grade level teams make decisions for Tier 2 students led by their case colleague. Grade level PLC teams and interventionists should examine grade level data to identify groups for win instruction. Choose intervention protocols for at-risk students. Progress monitor groups a minimum of every 2 weeks, documenting progress on Tier 2 spreadsheets. Monitor data monthly to examine intervention fidelity, and review and reassign groups each semester. Your district level MTSS team hopes you found this presentation to be informative and helpful, and that it better enables you to establish a healthy MTSS framework for school improvement